I'm Helene Starks. I'm the academic research coach for the Division of General Internal Medicine, and I'm here to support all of you doing your scholarship.
Okay, thank you. Let's get started. So Helene and I are doing this together. I wanted to talk for the first few minutes to give a little bit of background and context in this whole idea of doing a project, creating a project proposal and protocol from the perspective of, a clinician who does not have research training, and how I might think about the beginning of a project. And in fact, how you might think about the beginning of a project, and try to give a little bit of framework. And then I'll turn things over to Helene, who will get more into more of the granular details and practical details around how to write a project proposal. It says project protocol here. I think we're really focusing more on project proposals today. And Helene, do I have control here?
You should.
All right, I'm clicking.
There you go.
Okay, there it goes. So here are the objectives for today. By the end of the next 52 minutes, you will be able to identify what you want to know or improve. And let's be honest, that's probably not true. You're not going to be able to do this, but you're going to be able to think of this as a means of starting a project, is identifying what you want to know and what you want to improve. I'm going to talk a bit about a literature review and how important it is at the start of any project or writing a project proposal. And I'll give some tips on, like, how do you do that? I've noticed that that's an area of challenge for a lot of folks at the beginning of a project, doing a good literature review. So we'll talk about that. It's really critical to identify what the gaps are and what the current state of knowledge is. And finally, the project aims, Helene is going to talk a lot about in the second 3/4 of this talk, and how to align them with your area of inquiry and what other people are interested in as well. Okay, what's in it for you to get a project going? I'm curious, folks, on the call today. What do you think is your motivation for doing a project as a physician in a academic medical center? Feel free to just unmute.
Drop something in the chat or come off mute.
Chat or unmute, either way.
Something you enjoy outside of clinical medicine?
Yeah, no, that's so important, right? That is, in my mind, that's the most important thing, is what's fulfilling and authentic and feels important to you to do. Julia says passion, interest, connection. Great. Yeah, that's kind of the core of what we're trying to do here in professional development. So I think that's a great point. Topic of interest and adding to the knowledge. So kind of motivated by trying to make the world a better place in the area that you're interested in. So these are all great reasons why you might want to get a project going. Let's move forward to kind of some ideas that Helene and I had. And you'll see a ton of overlap here. We don't need to repeat all these. So, acquiring new skills, no one mentioned. If that's something that motivates you to kind of grow in a certain direction, a project may be a great way to do it. Investing in the future. Sometimes, I'll be honest, some of the projects I did was because I can't be a hospitalist 100%. I'm going to buy out some of my time by trying to do a project. And in my mind, that's totally legitimate too. Maybe I'm making the world a better place by making my world a better place. I think that's a legitimate reason to do a project as well. And so that kind of leads me to the idea of, at the beginning of a project, you're like thinking about doing something for some of the reasons that we just listed. Why are you doing it? Who benefits from it? And the way I like to think about it is, like, it could be you. Maybe it's someone more proximal to you, like you want to help residents and students or patients. Or maybe it's something that you want to do for our institution or community. And I just want to make the point, like, that all of these are legitimate, 100% legitimate. It's okay to do something because you want to, because it's fulfilling for you. I think as you move forward with a project and write a proposal, you'll want to consider the other circles beyond the one that you think is the primary circle for you. mean, maybe you're most motivated by doing something for the students. You should also think about, well, how is it going to help you? How do you benefit from it? And so it's kind of a melding of these circles. And I wanted to make that point early in this discussion as we talk about creating a protocol, that these are the things that in the back of your mind are going to be helpful as you move forward. Next slide, please, Helene. Okay, the other point I wanted to make that I've noticed folks, including myself, get stuck on in the beginning stages of writing a proposal, the beginning stages of putting a project together. Like you may think, for example, I want to do something around medical student physical examination. I want to do something about making that better. And how do you get started? Well, I think asking yourself, what do you want to know, or what do you want to make better, as the starting question. The what do you want to know is if you're doing some sort of scholarship of inquiry. And then once you kind of have an idea of what do you want to know, what do you want to improve, the next step is you can't just start typing from that usually. Well, I should say I can't. I mean, it's too big of a leap. So for me, the next step is, well, what am I going to do to figure out the answer to what I want to know? Or what am I going to do to improve the thing I want to improve? And then how am I going to do it? So it sounds simple, hopefully not simplistic, but this is a simple way of thinking, how do I start generating a proposal? So what are you going to do? How are you going to do it? And just writing that down, like, what is it that you're going to do? Well, how are you going to do it? And that becomes the starting point for the next steps in writing a project proposal. Oh, next slide, please, Helene. And so we do want to mention that this is highly germane right now for our division. You're all in our division. You are all eligible. Well, I think you're all eligible if you're 0.5 FT or greater to apply for scholarly project support. So there's like a couple weeks left to do this. This is the format. I think we'll send you out the document. I'm not going to go through this right now. And Helene can talk more about it. I believe she does a little bit later. You can see the criteria that make you eligible to apply for this. And also you can see how the proposals are going to be evaluated. It's no more than 2 pages. So that's really short. Most folks, if you have a project idea and a little bit of time, you do the literature review, you can write a legitimately formatted and accessible project proposal in probably a couple weeks. I mean, I guess it depends on what else you're doing during those 2 weeks. Next slide, please, Helene. And the last thing I wanted to talk about before I hand things over to Helene is, alongside this idea of what do you want to know, what do you want to improve, well, what are you going to actually do and how are you going to do it? I think the next big thing that goes alongside this is looking in the literature and doing a good literature review of what's already been done or said around this topic of interest. And I've noted recently that, well, not recently, I've noticed over the past few years that this is a step that folks get stuck on. It's hard to do a good literature review because it's really hard to know what's relevant, what's not relevant. How do I organize this? What's the point? How do I present it? And so the 5 C's are written down here. I'm not going to go through these in detail now. You'll get these slides. You can look through them. But having a framework for how you're going to review the literature and how you're thinking about presenting what you find is critical, I think, in a good project proposal. Do you want to say anything more about this, Helene? And actually, you can take over here. You can maybe say a little bit more about the lit review and then go on to Ames.
I think this is super important because, especially going back to Shom's point about what do you want to know and what do you want to do, and how are you going to do it, is really informed by the literature. You get a lot of really good ideas, either what did work or did not work in the past. And so, no point in reinventing the wheel on this. And it's also important because if you're going to be delving into an area of scholarship, you need to be on top of the literature anyway. You're kind of trying to formulate your expertise as the one who really knows about a lot about your topic. And so being well read is just a sort of foundation for doing good scholarship. So there's important reasons to do it. It also helps when you're thinking about, let's say you've done this project, you sort of fast forward to the end. We're very interested in having you disseminate your work to the extent that that is possible. And so doing a good literature review also sort of gives you a sense of, well, who is writing about this? Like, where are they writing about it? So if you wanted to sort of imagine the story that you would like to write about your project, you've already got some good ideas about where you might shop this around. So there's a whole 360 piece to this about starting in the beginning, but also informing your design, maybe some of the variables you might collect. Perhaps if some of what you're citing is previous survey work, rather than having to make a survey up from scratch, you can borrow something that's already out there. So as we're thinking about this, sort of the difference between this being simply a project versus scholarship, getting anchored in the literature is super important as a way to start. So hope that makes sense. And part of that then is because you are going to be trying to do your pitch. So the next bit, we're going to talk about aims which is really about communicating what are you going to do and how are you going to do it. And I'm going to make the argument that everything that you write always has to have an audience in mind. And I'm also going to make the claim that the first time you write anything, it's really for yourself, because you're trying to kind of answer that question that Shom introduced about what am I trying to do? And so the aims are a place where you get to work it out for yourself. But as you're moving this project, not only for your benefit, but thinking about who else will care, it becomes really important because it shapes the way in which you tell your story and sort of the style that you adopt. So for example, if you're thinking about pitching, Julia, I'm going to use yours just because I know it a little bit. So Julia is doing a project about trying to introduce dance as an activity for people with Alzheimer's disease, right? So sort of movement as a dance class as a form of all kinds of therapeutic outcomes. I'm going to botch your story and you'll tell it better in a minute. But, if you're pitching that idea to the director of an assisted living facility, you might pitch it one way about logistics, benefits, filling holes in your schedule. But if you're pitching it through a community newsletter to caregivers, you might pitch it really differently. You might talk about specifically when and where and how. So my point being that if you are just writing without knowing who you're writing for, you sometimes then write the wrong story. And what you're trying to do is find alignments so that whenever you're turning in a proposal, someone else is reading it. And as soon as you let go of it, it's going to be what they read. And so trying to align with your readers is a really key point. And part of that is because when people say, well, write me some aims, there's this feeling like there's a way to write aims. And what I'm going to tell you is there's no single way to write aims. This next set of slides comes from several workshops that I've done with the National Institutes of Health. And they were trying to help us understand that when you're writing to the NIH, or you may be writing to a foundation, or you may be writing, as we are, to our division chief, to give us some time to do some work, we want to align with the style of our audience. And so there's different ways to sort of think about what aims are doing. And a lot of that has to do with what type of project you're doing, and also kind of what's the state of the science when you're going in. Is this a project where you are actually ready for something like a randomized trial, in which case you've got hypotheses and you're actually testing them? Or do you not even know quite yet where to focus your attention because there's more baseline descriptive work that needs to be done first? So these may be more open-ended research questions that don't have specific directions for hypothesis just yet. So for example, we've got some folks now that want to do some descriptive epidemiology to better understand who are the patients in their clinic and what are their needs. There's not necessarily a hypothesis to test yet. So when we're thinking about this, you kind of want to think about, the right-hand side, but it also is important because different audiences are going to expect different kinds of data. So if I'm writing to the NIH, they're looking for rigorous evidence. They want to know, can I, what claims can I make, and what kind of statistical significance can I generate with my data? But there are other kinds where you're moving into like actions or products where there may be people who are really more kind of big picture folks, and they sort of need to see like, what's this going to get me in the end? It's not what question am I going to answer, but what is the product that's going to be delivered? So for example, you might think about those of the folks who are doing like educational interventions. You might say that an aim is to develop a curriculum and test it with R1s or R2s, right? And so you're really telling me the what, not necessarily the why. And then there may be others, like if you were doing something that was a quality improvement project where the central leadership, either of your hospital, your division, maybe a ward attending, they have a specific goal they're trying to reach. So across the board, everybody wants to reduce length of stay. So let's say that you're more kind of focused on the outcome. So this project will reduce length of stay by doing this thing. So you're sort of giving these keywords in these different places for people to be able to kind of see how that fits with their own agenda. And the more you've got that fit, the more you've got their attention, the easier it's going to be to sort of align with them and have them say, yes, I love this proposal. I'd love to fund you. Or yes, please go ahead. This is terrific. So that's really what you're trying to get to with a lot of this work. So I'm going to give you an example of sort of to show you how you can take the same intervention and write aims 5 different ways. So this was a intervention that Susan Merrill did. And what she was trying to get to was there'd been an idea that if you bring a chair in the room and you sit at bedside and you bring yourself to the level of the patient, you're going to increase satisfaction, you're going to increase connection with the patient because you're not lording over them, you're now meeting them more where they're at, and you're going to be able to have a more connected conversation. So if you take that project and write it 5 different ways, you can ask it as a research question where we don't yet know the answer. So what is the effect of putting chairs in the room to promote communication? We don't know. Let's go find out. As a hypothesis, you could say when physicians are seated, patients' ratings of satisfaction with communication will be higher. So you're predicting the outcome and the direction of the outcome with this kind of a hypothesis. An action would be, we will put chairs in patient rooms and measure patient satisfaction and communication ratings before and after. That's the elevator speech that has the methods and the outcomes in one short little sentence. Products is adding chairs is a good investment to improve communication with no added time or cost. And if I'm an administrator, I'm like, boom, isn't that cool? I got something that isn't something I could implement right now, would improve satisfaction at no cost to me. And then last, increase patient satisfaction scores without additional time or cost burden. It's like, wow, that's an easy win. All that takes is putting a chair in the room. Fantastic. So I'm going to just take a pause there. And I'm wondering if we can take a quick minute. And I'm going to ask each of you to think about whatever project you're mulling on right now, or make one up on the spot, just something you're curious about. And pick a style that seems to align with sort of what you know so far. And take a minute. Actually, I'll give you 3. And just draft something, anything. I don't have music, sorry for you.
I play some music. That was Nirvana Live at Reading. It's one of my favorite albums. Sorry, Helene, I got a look of disapproval from Helene for that.
We didn't hear it.
Oh, okay. I'm glad.
You guys have about another minute. If anybody has one that is written, I'm going to invite you to drop them in the chat just so that we can both learn a little bit about your projects and also kind of see what styles you're using. And great, and Julia, and also everyone, would you just label which one you think you're, which style you're using with these, just so that we can make sure we're all on the same page and sort of see different examples? Thanks. Agree. That's where I was going to put it, but it's useful to close the loop for all of us. You guys need a little more time. So Amy, that's kind of a narrative aim. And you might end up, if you were gonna, yeah, no, that's great. It's a good question. You might actually break that down into a couple questions, right? Because you actually have several questions. And if you were to do that, you would help, when Sean was back in there, what do you want to do? How are you going to do it? The link, I think, between the what do you want to know and the how you're going to do it is when people write aim 1, 2, and 3. Because the how you're going to do it, you're sort of writing an action. It's both question and action, right? Because you're implying what your actions are. But when you have multiple actions, it's really useful for the reader to go, oh, you're going to do action 1, and that's going to be this thing. And then action 2, and it's going to give us that answer. And action 3. So you could call this like aim 1 ABC. And organizing it in that way makes it easier for you. But the other part about aims that's super important is that everything else in the proposal has to be coherent and refer back to it. So your aim statement is like, oh, hey, Amy, what are you doing? Oh, I'm working on this project. Oh yeah, what are you doing? 1, 2, 3, bam. I'm going to do this, this, and this. And it becomes your super elevator speech for communicating. And then often we can imagine who's involved. You said a diabetes distress. So, oh, we're talking about diabetes patients, right? These little aims are really information rich. And they tell a beautiful short story. Same for you, like, oh, seated dance class for seniors. I've got the population, I've got the intervention, decrease neuropsychiatric symptoms. I've got the outcome, improve caregiver. So you gave us the whole snapshot with these aims. These are terrific. Ermias, you're asking us a question. Can adding a physician reminder in the EMR system help to increase screening for HBV? So it's part question, part hypothesis. You're leaving it open. You're not saying it will. You're asking what can it in primary care clinics. Great. So now you've given me the location. Physician reminder in the EMR is the intervention, and screening for HBV is the outcome. So you can see how these aim statements can be these beautiful little short stories that are orienting me to big picture and detail at the same time using these different styles. And I also want to point out they're all great aims, right? There's not like there's one style over another that's necessarily better or worse. So you guys are making my point. Appreciate it. Anybody else have some to pop in? Okay, I'm going to show you some examples, maybe, there we go, of sort of what I mean by this aims and audience. So just another couple things just to look at and kind of see these things. So these are all action aims. So when you have an action aim, you are almost always starting with a verb, because that's what action is you're doing something. So I'm helping you guys by really focusing in on some of these stylistic details, just to make transparent kind of what I'm asking you to attend to here, because it can make all the difference. So develop and refine. This was a pediatric palliative care training center I'm involved in, and it was trying to do these things. So this tells you what we were going to do. Develop and refine pediatric core curricular elements and training strategies. And we had 3 different audiences in mind for this project. So each aim was kind of doing a related, but quite a little bit separate project. So we made this argument in the proposal that the first aim was pointing toward pediatric clinicians who wanted to have palliative care specific skills. So pediatrics doing pediatric palliative care. The second was to find out amongst specialty palliative care experts and members of their target audience, what do they specifically need? So we were going to do a needs assessment for that particular group. So generalists wanting to learn specialty skills, specialists who have additional skills they need. And then the third is adults who don't take care of kids, but are called upon when there are no pediatric specialists around. So you can see we have these 3 different audiences, and we were targeting an intervention for each one that was separate, but together made a package. Does that make sense? So part of this, I guess, is being able to telegraph sort of the whole scope of work. This was a funded project for 4 years, so we had lots of time to do all these things. It's going to be also important to think about, how big a scope with both the time and resources that you have. And aims are telegraphing kind of all of that stuff. So you guys just practiced. I got ahead of myself. So to Shom's point about if the aims are what you want to know, then the next question that you want to ask and start to think about is, who are you going to involve and how are you going to get the work done? So I'm going to transition us to the next part of the protocol, which is how are we going to actually do it? I think, Shom, it's not just you. There we go. So I want to think about this in terms of the approach section of a proposal. So approach or methods is basically the next part. And this, in almost all the proposals, this is going to be the part that gets the most points when they're evaluating you, because it's really the who, what, when, where, and how part of the proposal that is detailing how you intend to spend your time and what will come out of it for all that you invest in it. So I think a really important part for all of us to consider is you all are not researchers. You're not in the physician scientist track. Some of you may have past experience with doing research, some of you may not. And the most important thing for developing any kind of a project that you're designing is what is the scope and possibility given the amount of time you have to dedicate to it and the amount of time other people have. So how can you recruit a team to help you out with this? And whether you need to pay them or whether they will volunteer their time or be voluntold to work with you. Whether there's small pots of money you could go after for small things like gift incentives to your participants, or big money that's actually going to buy you out and other people too. So for all of those things, what I tell people when they come to see me, very often they're coming with a 10-year plan and a $10 million NIH budget, and they want to commit this, get it done in the next 6 months by themselves with no money. So we have to scale and get it right. So that you can get it done. And small projects are awesome projects, as long as we do them well with the resources that we have. So I like to think about it in these 4 buckets, because the first part, the aims, we've just talked about. But as I said, just taking a look at Amy, I'm going to use yours as an example here. You probably working within your clinic with your own clinic resources, not extra funding, right? Pretty normal. And it sounds like you're doing something that looks like sort of like a quality improvement project with using patient satisfaction as kind of an outcome. Like if you improve something, like you're doing something to get some data without messing up the regular workflow. You're trying to add something new in without messing up your workflow. Is that a fair way to put it? So do you mind coming off mute for just a second? Because it might be a fun way to just both workshop your project and also sort of demonstrate some of these things. So, if you're going to not impede the workflow, then your audience, I'm guessing, are your colleagues first and foremost, right? So how are you using your colleagues for this first set of questions about, how are you going to design it and what are you going to ask them to do?
So this is a project that I'm helping the the psychologist and the psychiatrist in our clinic, and I volunteered to be one of the 2 physicians. So I'm it's not my whole thing, and so they've started the one piece, but my piece is the physician side of things. So they started with enrolling the medical assistants who would. We did a pilot of say 2 weeks of collecting data with our medical assistants, because they're the ones that had to do the survey at the step in. So we tried a few different options for the flow, can we hand them something before the visit electronically at the visit reminder, or is it on telemedicine? Can she just share a screen and they check? So it started, all the work was on the medical assistant to start with, because they're the data collectors basically.
Right. So this is a perfect example of, you're trying to take something that's an existing structure and modify it. And so when you're thinking about the team, it's like, well, who all is going to be impacted by that modification, and what's the way to do it that actually leads with more winners than losers, right? And so I don't know what sort of things, but even if then you go and you sort of take this as the intervention that you're doing, the rest of the proposal is then, okay, let's say we've got that part figured out for those. That's actually fitting into both the design, but it's also the logistics, right? Because you're thinking about who's getting the data collection. Where's that going once they have it? Is this on a red cap survey? When they do something on a screen, click, 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 is that something that it's one and done? Do they have to do it again? You're making all these great, this is a great example for sort of showing all these different pieces. Once that's collected, let's say the MAs are doing it. The MAs are probably not analyzing that, I'm guessing, right? So you have another set of people on your team that are responsible for sort of taking on that part. This is the beauty of teams, and certainly this is one of the resources that I can help all you with is both data collection and analysis. That's one of the things that I offer to all of you as your academic research coach. So keep me in mind as a team member if you don't have those resources on your own teams. And then, I'm wondering for you, just thinking ahead, I always like people to fast forward to the end and assume everything went swimmingly. It went perfectly according to plan, right? I always think of proposals as a beautiful fiction, right? You're calling something into being. And if you're doing that and you're going to that effort, you want to hopefully to disseminate it to somebody. Maybe it's just starting with your department as some kind of a report back. Maybe if the data are of sufficient quality and you have enough of them to consider publishing this somewhere in a journal. Shom has taught me about the beauty of the SGIM forum as a place. They don't all have to be top-notch journals and peer-reviewed, but if you've come this far, we really hope that you're going to share it with somebody because you've learned something and you want others to as well, right?
And there are others doing this at the same time. Like we chose not to jump on to, like, say UCSF is doing their own, but all the data is theirs, and we don't have any, we can no longer use the data, and they're looking for a different goal than us anyway. So it's not like it's not a brand new thing. So that's, yeah.
Yeah, and you're making a great point, right? If you wanted to make this something that was going to have a bigger impact and a bigger impact journal, then thinking about what are the possibilities for multi-institutional collaborations so that everybody wins, right? If you're doing this one place, they'll say, oh, that's a nice little study that you did in this one place, and think of it like a pilot. And then if you are able to do the same thing in multiples, then you're just increasing the footprint and the capacity for generalizing your both your intervention as well as the results from that intervention. There's a lot of creative networks that I know people across UW Medicine, between the VA, Harborview, community clinics, Montlake Northwest. So there are different ways in which you can think. And sometimes, even though we're a similar institution, if you involve all 4 sites, you're actually doing a multi-site trial. So there are ways to think about it. It's not the same because it's the same institution, but it's still, we know in our own way that those 4 hospitals have really different people in them. So you can be increasing the diversity of your recruitment by just including folks at another site. So those are all things to think about. Any questions here? I'm seeing heads nodding across the board, so I'm gonna assume that means we're good to go. Oopsie. The other thing that I like to have us think about as we're thinking about these things is resources come in these kind of 4 big buckets. So the first one is time. And what that means is that if you're doing this without a budget, you're volunteering your time. Or we might call it you're investing in yourself, right? Because there's 2 ways to think about this. If you can't do this work while you're on the clock, but you really want to do the work, then it's not that you're doing it for anyone else. And I'm really hoping that you're doing it for you is the first person you're serving, because your first resource is you. And so value your time as the gift that it is back to the university, because that's what you're doing here. Some of you would then look for opportunities to get paid for that, so you're not doing it as a volunteer. And so, first is your time. The next is either money to buy your time, or to buy other people's times, or to buy other supplies and things if it's getting bigger than that. This is the brain power of your colleagues and any other human resources for collaborators that you would be looking for. And this represents data. And data can come to you either pre-made as it's coming out of the electronic health record. There are ways in which you can do data queries and data extractions either by yourself or with a little bit of help, or if you need a lot of help, that's when you're going to ask for money to ask for somebody else's smart brain to help you manage all your data, because these things become connected really quickly. When you look at a typical NIH grant, 1/2 to 2/3 of the budget is personnel. Is really you're just buying their time, because that's what it takes to do this project. And you're buying typically a lot of different people's expertise, and together the team is what is making this project So people think very carefully about how they put their teams together to make sure that if there's a 360 view on the project, you've got an expert or a staff person who's sort of attached to each of those pieces. And that's what sends credibility that you're going to be able to do the project with the resources that you've asked for on the timeline that you've given. Does that make sense? So in case you were wondering, well, where are said resources? There are quite a few opportunities locally within UW-Medicine. Shom, do you know the CLIMB Center for Leadership and Innovation in Medical Education is a small grants program, about $5,000, and they usually ask for proposals.
Yeah, I mean, they is me,
That's
to be
you.
honest. It's $5,000, and we're going to be sending out the call for grants very soon.
And what kind of projects get funded?
Something to do with medical education. There's two big buckets. One is around inquiry around medical education, and another is kind of more innovations or educational interventions in medical education. So there's kind of like the inquiry bucket, and then there's the intervention bucket.
So people might be developing in the inquiry, they might develop a curriculum, and in innovation, they might use it and test it.
I think that's one way to think about it. It's also kind of like looking at different learning theories, might be a area of inquiry. There might be a literature synthesis around different educational methods, systematic reviews, kind of looking at different cognitive theories about what is effective for education in a way that is not necessarily in the form of a curricular intervention.
And does the $5,000 buy people's time or other stuff?
Other stuff.
Okay.
It can.
So this.
Sorry, one thing quickly. It can buy some statistical help time, but it can't buy FTE time for faculty members. Sorry, Helene.
No, so I'm sharing this with you guys to show that this would be one where you would be getting often some time to invest in doing some often foundational work on which you may then be using this as a stepping stone for the next piece of your research platform or your scholarship.
Yeah, I'll just say sometimes a little money goes a long way. I mean, it can be very helpful for incentives for participants. You might just need a little bit of money to buy some statistical support or administrative support. Sometimes you need materials like a computer, like a program for qualitative research or other things. So yeah, it's a small amount of money, but oftentimes it's enough to just kind of make the project go forward.
Again, a pretty short proposal and a couple pager. And so it's also just great practice. I think writing for any of these opportunities is good practice because you're getting in the habit of starting to channel your ideas in this standardized format. I'm available to you for design, analysis, help along the way, before, during, or after. I've helped people do the whole cycle, including publication. We have this current grant opportunity to buy some of your time. The LEAF is the query that I was telling you for those of you who may want to get some EHR data. So let's say you wanted to describe a patient population and you knew some things about that population, you can do a data query, and I can also help you with that to sort of just get some basic epidemiological data about your population. Might be about doing eligibility. It might be actually doing some hypothesis testing, whatever. If you have that, it's a resource to you. I don't know as much about PSIP and WGEA. Do you, Shom?
I'm not sure what the current status of the PSIP grants are. Does anyone know? Anyone doing the certificate program in patient safety? Yeah, I would have to look that.
These have been opportunities in the past where it's a call for a pretty big sum. About $50,000, I think.
Yeah, we can look that up. This may be left over from prior times you've done this talk. The WGA grant is typically also a small amount, like a couple $1,000s. Same sort of idea with the CLIMB grants.
So all to say that there are little pots of money out there, and if you just need a little bit of pot of money to get yourself started on doing a project, know that there are places to ask, and we can always help connect you with more. So in the last piece, I'm coming back to this outline because I think it's pretty classic. This is how most short proposals get written. There's a stylistic difference where they often do significance first, sort of like the why, and then the specific aims for the what. This one has flipped it. So it's a little interesting to do the what first and then the why. The arguments are just, I'm reading them and it's like, oh yeah, that's a style change. People want to know about innovation, but you really are, these are the number of paragraphs that you are dedicating to it. So they want to know something, but it's hard to be new and exciting and sizzling every day. So make this be a small innovation, not a big one. Like this is not nuclear fission, right? It's just a small thing that's going to be different. So think about what's different about this. What is the added value is another way to think about this. In this instance, because this is essentially giving you support, they want to know that you have people on your team. So sometimes it'll be called mentorship and collaboration. Other times it's just collaboration. So think about this is your team and who's helping you. For those who are going after this, they want to know what's your own plan for yourself. So they're listening to hear, how is it that if I invest in you now, you're going to be able to use that investment to further your own career and sort of further your own project ideas. So it's almost like seed money to get you launched. And so, or if you've already received it, to keep you going. So pay attention to that because it's a useful thing because they're investing in you and they're seeing your project as sort of an example of you and the kind of scholar that you are. So those two things are part and parcel of the same thing. And it's a pitch because the more that is making sense, I want this because it serves my patients. My patients doing this good job makes me feel better and makes the world a better place. We're also improving their quality of life, and that is making satisfaction increase for the institution. So you're sort of linking all these different pieces from yourself to the big world and back and sort of saying why it matters. And then the last piece is really so that somebody can look at the scope of your project and see if what you've proposed is actually feasible. So when they're asking you for a timeline, it's their snapshot of going, do they know what they're doing, or have they, really bit off more than they can manage here? So it's a way for them to see it. And I want to say that there's kind of two ways to write timelines. And one is I have a 5-year plan and it's going to take me 5 years to do it. So I'm going to write it out because I want to take all the time I really need to get it done. So that's what I know that I want to do. And now I'm designing for the amount of time it's going to take me to get that done. The other is like this one, they're giving you 2 years. Actually, they're giving you a year and then a second year. So you have to be planning, what could I get done in a year to show enough of my work to have them say, okay, great, let's give you another year. So there's 2 different ways of doing it. So if you know what you want to do, then you have to ask, how long will it take to get it done? And you start at the beginning and you go, okay, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to do the next thing. If you know how much time you have, then it's really what's possible. And then you start at the end and you're like, okay, by 2 years from now, I'll have this done. So what would I have to get done before that, and before that, right? And then there's 2 classic ways that people represent this. One is they use what's called a Gantt chart, and it's been called Gantt for so long, I don't even know what it stands for. I'm sure it was an acronym, but I can't tell you that. I'm not sure it's an acronym. It might be someone's name for all I know. But essentially what you do is you put all the time down, and then you put all the activities down, and then you say, okay, this is when I'm going to do it. And you will see that there are some activities that are going to overlap because you absolutely, oh, thank you, Daniela. It's the name of the person who invented it. You are showing somebody at a snapshot kind of what's the scope of your work and what's the progress. So you're also saying that there's going to be phases which you will be done, and then you'll be ready to move on to the next part. And this is I just do either a table in Excel or a table in Word. And if you have too many months and you don't need this granularity, sometimes people will just chunk them into quarters. And then the top would say quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, quarter 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or something like that. Because it sort of depends on how much room you have and how many activities you've got going on. The other way that people will do this is in kind of a narrative form. And that's where you're sort of, instead of putting this in a chart, you're sort of saying the same thing. In this chunk of time, we're going to do this, and then this, and then this. And I am a big fan of marking things out to sort of help people. So whatever little tricks you can put in there that sort of says, okay, so this is year 1 scope of work, and we're going to get all this done. And then we'll be ready to do year 2 work. And so it sort of also, and often we'll include words like milestones and dates, because that's also sort of your deliverables. So you're telegraphing, you know, by this time we'll have this done and there will be a product there. I find these in some ways, it's sort of like a word salad. It gets a little overwhelming. I personally find Gantt charts to be easier to consume because it's a snapshot that shows linearity, and it also sort of shows the sequencing of the events. And you can see that they actually take up about the same amount of space on a real estate. And so if that's the case, why not just do it this way? The other thing that I don't think I put in here, but I should have, would be to say something, which I did say here, about when are your manuscripts going to get drafted? Or when is a presentation? So for example, if you have the intent of doing a project so you can submit an abstract to a meeting, then adding that to your Gantt chart. So let's say you wanted to submit to SGIM, and then their abstracts are usually in the spring. So if that was the case, then you would pick the month when that abstract was due, and you would add a line and say submit abstract to SGIM and put a box there. And then that sort of telegraphs to the person who is evaluating this that you've accounted for sort of the things that they're interested in for markers of scholarship as well. So we are out of time. That happened fast. We would really appreciate it if you can, if you haven't already, I'm just going to pop this in again for Daniela's request for the evaluation form. And yep, she did it twice. So now you've got it as many times as you need. And with that, we're going to end our session today. And Daniela, you can go ahead and stop recording.